The Galactic Council of Apex Predators had existed for 3,000 years. It was an exclusive club for the most dangerous species in the known universe. Only those who came from deadly worlds could join. Your planet needed crushing gravity. Your atmosphere needed poison. Your species needed to survive hell itself, just to become intelligent. For 3,000 years, these powerful beings met every decade at a station orbiting a dead star. They discussed territory. They made trade agreements. They reminded each other why they were the masters of the galaxy. No soft species had ever been invited. No weak civilization had ever seen the inside of their sacred halls. Then, humanity arrived. The Vraxian exploration fleet found the human vessel, Endurance, drifting near the outer rim. The Vraxians were massive reptilian creatures covered in scales harder than steel. They breathed sulfur and bathed in acid pools for relaxation. When they first saw the pink soft-skinned humans, they laughed. Commander Vrex ordered his science team to scan Earth. They expected to find a gentle paradise. They expected to confirm that humans were nothing more than lucky accidents who had somehow stumbled into space travel. What they found changed everything. Earth had deserts where temperatures reached 60 degrees. It had frozen wastelands at both poles where nothing should survive. It had massive oceans filled with predators that could swallow a Vraxian whole. Volcanoes erupted without warning. The ground itself shook and split open. Storms tore across the surface with enough force to flatten cities, and humans lived everywhere. They lived in all of it. Commander Vrex watched footage of humans climbing frozen mountains just for entertainment. He saw them diving into crushing ocean depths. He witnessed them running through burning forests to save strangers. He learned about their wars, their plagues, their natural disasters. He discovered that humans had split the atom and used it to destroy their own cities, and they had survived. They had rebuilt. They had reached the stars. Vrex brought his findings to the council. The debate lasted for 3 days. The silicoid hegemony opposed the invitation. They were beings of living crystal who evolved on a volcanic world where the very rocks were alive and hungry. They called humans disgusting bags of water. The Cryoborn Collective refused to take the matter seriously. They existed in temperatures so cold that nitrogen froze solid. To them, humans would shatter like glass in a gentle breeze. The Thornback Dominion wanted to simply conquer Earth. Their species had evolved covered in poisonous spikes on a jungle world where everything killed everything else. Why invite weakness to the table when you could crush it? But the Vraxians argued their case. They showed the footage again and again. Humans climbing impossible heights. Humans swimming impossible depths. Humans surviving impossible odds through nothing but stubborn refusal to die. The vote passed by a single margin. Humanity would be invited as observers. They would watch. They would learn their place. And perhaps the council would be entertained by their struggles. Ambassador Kenji Okafor was selected to represent Earth. He was 63 years old. His hair had turned gray from decades of service in the most difficult places his planet had to offer. He had climbed Everest twice. He had survived a plane crash in the Amazon. He had negotiated peace in war zones where everyone else had failed. When Kenji first saw the summit station, he understood immediately what humanity was facing. The station was built to intimidate. It was massive and dark and shaped like a claw grasping at the dying star below. The message was clear. Power lived here. Weakness did not survive. His delegation was small. Lieutenant Sarah Chen served as his aide. She was young and brilliant and noticed details others missed. Dr. Marcus Webb handled scientific matters. Captain Jana Volkov provided security. For humans to face 14 species of apex predators, the airlock opened, and they stepped into the Great Hall. Every eye turned toward them. Every alien gaze measured them and found them lacking. The silicoids towered above like statues carved from diamonds. The Vraxians flexed claws that could cut through steel. The Thornbacks rattled their poisonous spikes in what might have been laughter. A cryoborn delegate drifted closer, its body a swirling mass of frozen gases. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as it approached. The cryoborn spoke. Its voice sounded like ice cracking. It said the soft ones had finally arrived. It said the council had been waiting to see what passed for dangerous on such a gentle world. It asked if humans found the station too cold. Perhaps they needed warming blankets. The other delegates made sounds that Kenji recognized as laughter. Kenji smiled. He had faced worse than cold stares. He bowed respectfully and thanked the council for its invitation. He said humanity was honored to observe and learn from such distinguished species. His tone was warm. His words were humble. His eyes missed nothing. Over the next several hours, Kenji moved through the gathering. He shook appendages and claws and things that had no name in human language. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions that seemed innocent but revealed much. Lieutenant Chen stayed close, recording everything. She noticed something strange about 3 of the delegates. Their movements were slightly wrong. Their biosignatures fluctuated in ways that did not match their species. She made a note and said nothing. Dr. Webb examined the station's technology with barely hidden excitement. These species had mastered sciences humanity had only dreamed of. But he also noticed gaps, weaknesses, places where human creativity might succeed, where alien power could not. Captain Volkov stood quietly and watched the shadows. She had learned long ago that the most dangerous threats were the ones you did not see coming. Something about this summit felt wrong. Something hiding beneath the surface. That night, in their small quarters, the human delegation gathered. Kenji told his team what he had learned. The council was not unified. Old hatreds simmered between species. Alliances shifted like sand. Everyone was keeping secrets. Chen reported her findings about the 3 strange delegates. Their readings did not match any known species. Volkov said she had counted at least 12 hidden weapons in the Great Hall. Someone was preparing for violence. Webb said the station's systems had been modified recently. Someone had added surveillance equipment that even the council did not seem to know about. Kenji sat in silence for a long moment. Then he smiled. He said, "This was good. This was familiar." Humans had navigated such dangerous waters for all of their history. They had faced predators who underestimated them since they first came down from the trees. The council thought they had invited observers. They thought they had brought entertainment for their summit. They had made a mistake. What they had actually done was invite humanity into the center of galactic power. And humanity had never entered any room without eventually changing it forever. Outside, in the cold depths of space, something ancient and hungry watched the station. The Neurovore Syndicate had waited decades for this moment. All the pieces were finally in place. The apex species would destroy each other, and from the ashes, the Neurovores would feast. They had only overlooked one small detail: the humans they invited. Humans to the Death World Summit, their final, fatal mistake. Part 2, the second day of the summit, brought the trial of origins. It was an ancient tradition that every new species had to complete. The council would create a perfect simulation of the newcomer's deadliest environment. The species would then prove their worth by surviving it. The other delegates gathered in the observation galleries with great excitement. They had been waiting for this. They wanted to watch the soft humans struggle against their own planet's mild challenges. They expected comedy. They expected to finally prove that humanity did not belong among apex predators. Ambassador Kenji Okafor stood before the simulation chamber. The Varaxian High Commander asked what scenario humanity would choose. Would they face one of their small predators? Perhaps a storm? Maybe one of their tiny earthquakes? Kenji's answer surprised everyone. He said humanity would recreate the 1996 Everest disaster. The council members exchanged confused glances. They had researched Earth. But a single mountain meant nothing to species who lived on worlds of constant volcanic eruption or eternal ice. How dangerous could one mountain be? The simulation began. The chamber transformed instantly. The temperature crashed to 60 degrees below zero. The oxygen level dropped to 1/3 of normal. Wind began to howl at speeds that would have stripped flesh from bone. Snow and ice appeared everywhere, blinding and deadly. The human team stepped into the nightmare. Kenji led them forward through the blizzard. They wore heavy suits and carried equipment, but the conditions overwhelmed everything. Ice formed on their masks. Their fingers began to freeze inside their gloves. Every breath burned their lungs. In the observation gallery, the Cryoborn collective watched with new interest. The cold was real. The cold was deadly. They had not expected Earth to possess such temperatures. The simulation recreated the actual disaster perfectly. The human team pushed toward the summit while the storm intensified. Radio communications began to fail. Team members became separated in the whiteout conditions. Decisions had to be made about who to save and who to leave behind. The Silicoid Patriarch leaned forward in his seat. He watched a human woman collapse in the snow. Her team members had a choice. They could leave her and save themselves. That was the logical decision. That was what any apex species would do. Instead, two humans turned back. They lifted their fallen companion and carried her on their shoulders. They moved slower now. Their own chances of survival dropped significantly. The math was obvious. They were choosing death. The Patriarch demanded an explanation. He asked why the humans were throwing away their lives for one individual, Captain. Volkov answered through the communication system. Her voice was steady despite the cold that was killing her slowly. She said humans did not leave their people behind. She said that was not negotiable. She said it never would be. The simulation continued. Hours passed in moments as the scenario compressed time. The human team faced impossible choices again and again. One member developed severe frostbite and could no longer walk. Another began showing signs of altitude, sickness that would kill him within hours. Kenji gathered his team in a shallow ice cave. The storm raged outside. Death waited in every direction. Any logical species would have accepted defeat. Kenji started talking. He reminded them of who they were. He spoke of their families waiting at home. He talked about the millions of humans who had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. He told stories of ancestors who had crossed frozen wastelands and burning deserts and churning oceans. Because giving up was simply not inhuman. Nature. The Viraxian High Commander watched. This speech with growing confusion, his scales rippled with emotion he could not name. He had commanded armies. He had conquered worlds, but he had never seen anything like this. He had never seen a species draw strength from something beyond physical power. The humans moved out into the storm again. They climbed higher when they should have retreated. They carried their wounded when they should have abandoned them. They sang songs through frozen lips to keep their spirits alive. They told jokes that made no sense to the alien observers but somehow gave the humans strength to take one more step. When the simulation finally ended, the human team stood at the summit. They were battered and frostbitten and barely alive. Several would have died from their injuries in reality. But they were standing. They were together. They had not left a single person behind. The observation gallery fell silent. The Thornback, warlord, broke the silence first. He said he had been wrong about humans. He said they were not soft. He said they were something else entirely. Something his language had no word for. Kenji helped his team members out of the simulation chamber. His hands were shaking from the cold that still gripped his body. His lips were blue. His eyes were exhausted. But those eyes were also blazing with something that made several delegates look away. Ambassador Okafor addressed the council. He said Earth was not an easy world. He said humans did not become the dominant species by being the fastest or the strongest. He said they survived by never accepting defeat, by carrying each other through the darkness. By being too stubborn to die, the summit continued, but something had changed. The jokes about soft humans stopped. The mocking comments disappeared. Several delegates began approaching the human team with genuine questions rather than contempt. But not everyone was pleased. In the shadows of the station, the three strange delegates that Lieutenant Chen had noticed held a secret meeting. They were not who they appeared to be. They were neurovore agents, wearing the bodies of their victims like costumes. They had spent decades infiltrating the council. They had manipulated conflicts and deepened hatreds between species. Everything was in place for their plan, but the humans were becoming a problem. The lead agent made a decision. The humans needed to be removed before they disrupted everything. They would frame Lieutenant Chen for espionage. The crime would demand execution under silicoid law. The humans would be discredited and destroyed. The trap was set that very night. Chen returned to her quarters to find silicoid security forces waiting. They showed her the evidence. Military encryption codes had been found in her belongings. Her biosignature was on the access logs. The proof was absolute. Chen knew she was innocent. She also knew that innocence meant nothing when the evidence was manufactured by enemies who could wear any face. The silicoid guards dragged her away to face judgment. In his quarters, Ambassador Okafor received the news with quiet rage. His young aide was going to be executed for a crime she did not commit. The council that had just witnessed human determination now expected him to accept this injustice without protest. They did not understand humans at all. Kenji began making calls. He gathered his team. He reviewed every piece of information they had collected since arriving. If the council wanted to see what humans were truly capable of, he would give them a demonstration they would never forget. The summit was about to become very interesting. They invited humans to the Death World. Summit, their final. Fatal Mistake Part 3. The council chamber was filled with tension. Every delegate had gathered to witness the trial of Lieutenant Sarah Chen. The silicoid patriarch stood at the center, his crystalline body glowing with barely contained fury. Military encryption codes were the lifeblood of his hegemony. Stealing them meant death. There were no exceptions. Chen stood in restraints designed for beings much larger and stronger than herself. The metal bands covered her arms from wrist to elbow. She could barely move. Her face was calm, but her eyes scanned the room constantly, taking in every detail. Ambassador Okafor stood beside her. He had refused to leave her alone. The silicoids had tried to prevent him from attending, but he had simply walked past their guards as if they did not exist. No one had been willing to physically stop him. Not after the trial of Origins. The patriarch presented the evidence. The codes had been found in Chen's personal quarters. Her biosignature was recorded accessing the silicoid database at precisely 3 in the morning. Video footage showed her entering and leaving the secure area. The case was closed. Chen said nothing. She knew the evidence was false. She also knew that arguing against manufactured proof was pointless. Someone had gone to great lengths to frame her. The patriarch declared his judgment. Under silicoid law, the punishment was immediate execution. The method would be crystallization. Chen would be transformed into living stone and then shattered. Her remains would be scattered in space as a warning to others. Several delegates nodded in approval. Ancient laws must be honored. New species must learn their place. Ambassador Okafor stepped forward. The patriarch told him to be silent. Humans were observers. They had no voice in council matters. They had no rights. They had no power. Okafor ignored him completely. He said he had something to share with the council. He said it was relevant to the current situation. He said anyone who was not interested in the truth could leave now. No one left. Curiosity was stronger than protocol. Okafor activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Data streams appeared showing communication records, financial transactions, and military movements from the past decade. He said the council had a problem. He said it was much bigger than one alleged spy. The Varaxian High Commander demanded an explanation. His claws flexed with impatience. Okafor smiled. He said humans were pattern recognition specialists. It was how they survived on Earth. They spotted predators hiding in tall grass. They predicted weather changes from subtle cloud movements. They sensed lies in the tone of a voice or the flicker of an eye. The holographic data shifted. Red lines connected different species delegations. Secret meetings. Hidden payments. Betrayals upon betrayals. Okafor pointed at the Varaxian delegation. He revealed that for the past 8 years, the Varaxians had been selling weapons to the enemies of the Cryoborn Collective. The sales were hidden through third parties, but the patterns were clear. The Cryoborn representatives surged toward the Varaxian commander. Only the intervention of security forces prevented violence, Okafor continued. He showed that the silicoid hegemony had been mining in forbidden space, Neurovore territory. They had been extracting resources from quarantined worlds for decades, the very laws they used to condemn Chen. They themselves had broken 1,000 times. The patriarch's crystalline form flickered with colors that indicated shock. He demanded to know how humans had accessed such information. Okafor shrugged. He said, humans asked questions. They listened. They watched. They noticed things that others missed because others were too busy looking down on them. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species accused each other of treachery. Ancient alliances cracked and shattered. The careful balance of power that had held for centuries collapsed in moments. Through it all, Okafor remained calm. He raised his hand for silence. The chaos continued for several seconds, but eventually, curiosity won again. Everyone wanted to know what else the human had discovered. Okafor said there was one more thing. He said it was the most important thing. He pointed at 3 specific delegates. A Varaxian aide named Kreth, a cryoborn scientist called Vornis, a silicoid merchant known as Crystallis. He said these 3 were not who they appeared to be. The accused delegates froze. For just a moment, something shifted in their expressions. Something inhuman flickered behind their eyes. Okafor explained that Lieutenant Chen had noticed irregularities in their biosignatures from the first day. Their readings fluctuated in ways that did not match any known species. They moved with subtle wrongness that human eyes could detect, but alien senses missed. He said these 3 were Neurovore agents. The word Neurovore sent a ripple of genuine fear through the chamber. The Neurovore Syndicate was the galaxy's nightmare. Parasitic entities that consumed neural matter and absorbed memories. They could wear bodies like costumes. They could become anyone. They had been banned from civilized space for millennia. The 3 accused delegates began to laugh. The sound was wrong. It was layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. Their bodies began to shift and change. The disguises they had worn for years melted away like wax. What stood in their place was horrifying. Writhing masses of parasitic tissue that pulsed with stolen life. Tentacles emerged from bodies that had no fixed shape. Eyes appeared and disappeared across their surfaces. The lead, Neurovore, spoke with a voice that blended dozens of consumed victims. It said the human was clever. Cleverer than expected. But it was far too late. Security forces raised weapons, but half of them turned those weapons on the delegates instead. More Neurovores. More parasites wearing familiar faces. The infiltration went deeper than anyone had imagined. The lead Neurovore explained their plan. For 30 years they had been placing agents throughout the council. They had manipulated conflicts. They had deepened hatreds. They had ensured that, when the moment came, the apex species would destroy each other while the Neurovores watched and waited to feast on the remains. The humans had almost ruined everything. But almost was not enough. The Neurovore gestured, and the compromised security forces advanced. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy. Chen looked at Okafor. Even in restraints, even facing death, her eyes were steady. She trusted her ambassador completely. Okafor looked back at her. Then he looked at the council. He said the Neurovores had made a mistake. They had studied apex predators for decades. They understood species that dominated through individual strength. They knew how to divide and conquer beings who trusted no one. But they had only studied humans for a few days. They did not understand what made humanity dangerous. Okafor turned to the Varaxian High Commander. He asked a simple question. He asked if the commander wanted to die alone, killed by parasites while his ancient enemies watched, or if he wanted to fight alongside former rivals against a common threat. The commander's scales rippled. His claws flexed. Generations of hatred for other species burned in his blood, but something else burned brighter. Something the Neurovores had never anticipated. Pride. The commander stepped forward and stood beside the human ambassador. He said that Varaxians did not die cowering. If this was the end, he would face it fighting. One by one, other delegates joined them. The cryoborn, The Thornbacks. The Silicoids. Ancient enemies standing together for the first time in 3,000 years. The lead. Neurovor's many eyes blinked in confusion. Okafor smiled. He said this was what humans brought to the galaxy. Not superior strength. Not advanced technology. Just a simple truth that apex predators had forgotten. Together, they were stronger. The battle for the summit was about to begin. They invited humans to the Death World Summit, their final, fatal mistake part for the Council. Chamber exploded into violence. The Neurovore-controlled security forces opened fire immediately. Energy beams sliced through the air, striking delegates who were too slow to react. A Thornback warrior took a direct hit and crashed to the ground, poisonous spikes shattering on impact. But the apex species had not survived there. Death Worlds, by being slow. The Silicoid Patriarch raised his crystalline arms, and his body began to reconfigure. The living crystal grew outward, forming a massive shield that blocked the incoming fire. Other Silicoids joined him, creating a wall of diamond-hard protection. Behind this barrier, the Varaxian warriors charged. Their armored scales deflected glancing shots as they crashed into the enemy lines. Claws that could cut through starship hulls tore through the controlled soldiers without mercy. The Cryoborn released waves of freezing cold that turned weapons to brittle ice. The Thornbacks launched volleys of poisonous spikes that paralyzed anything they touched. But the Neurovores were prepared for this. They had studied each species for decades. They knew every strength and every weakness. Their controlled forces adapted instantly, countering each attack with precision. Ambassador Okafor watched the chaos with calculating eyes. The apex species were powerful individually, but they were fighting separately. Each group used their own tactics without coordination. The Varaxians charged when they should have held position. The Silicoids defended when they should have advanced. The Cryoborn and Thornbacks attacked the same targets, while other enemies flanked them. 3,000 years of rivalry had not prepared them to fight together. OKFOR. Grabbed the Varaxian High Commander and pulled him behind. Cover. The commander snarled at the touch. No one grabbed a Varaxian warrior. Okafor ignored the anger. He said the council was losing. He said the Neurovores had planned for exactly this situation. He said the only chance was to fight as one unit instead of 14 separate armies. The commander asked how that was possible. These species had been enemies since before humans had discovered fire. Trust did not exist between them. Okafor said trust was not required. Only coordination. Only listening. Only following a plan. He said he had a plan. The commander stared at the human for a long moment. His warrior instincts screamed against taking orders from a soft-skinned being half his size. But his survival instincts screamed louder. He said he would listen. Okafor began issuing commands through the communication system. His voice was calm and clear despite the battle raging around them. He told the Silicoids to form a wedge instead of a wall. He positioned them to push into the enemy formation rather than simply block attacks. Their diamond bodies became a battering ram that nothing could stop. He directed the Varaxians to follow in the Silicoid wake. Their claws and strength would eliminate any enemies that survived the initial charge. No more wild attacks. Controlled aggression with purpose. He had the Cryoborn focus on the station's environmental systems. They flooded specific corridors with freezing temperatures, creating kill zones that only their allies knew to avoid. Enemies rushed into traps and died frozen solid. The Thornbacks received special instructions. Their poisonous spikes could not kill Neurovores directly, but they could paralyze the host bodies the parasites controlled. Okafor had them target specific limbs rather than attempting killing shots. And the humans? Okafor sent his small team into the maintenance tunnels. Captain Volkov led the way through passages too small for most species. These tunnels had not been designed for combat. They connected life support systems and power conduits throughout the station. No one expected enemies to use them because no one could fit, except humans. Lieutenant Chen had been freed from her restraints by Dr. Webb, using a plasma cutter meant for laboratory work. She moved through the tunnels with Volkov, mapping the station's systems as they went. Dr. Webb followed with a bag of components, scavenged from multiple species technology. He was building something. He would not explain what. In the main chamber, the battle shifted. The coordinated assault pushed the Neurovores back for the first time. Species that had never worked together discovered unexpected strengths in their alliance. Silicoid shields protected Varaxian charges. Cryoborn cold slowed enemies for thornback poison. The lead Neurovore watched with growing frustration. This was not how apex predators behaved. They did not cooperate. They did not follow orders from weaker species. They destroyed each other while the parasites waited. The human had changed everything. The Neurovore made a decision. Reinforcements were coming from hidden ships throughout the sector. They would arrive within the hour. But that hour needed to be survived first, and the human needed to die. The lead Neurovore abandoned its position and slithered into the maintenance tunnels. Its body could reshape itself to fit any space. It would find the human ambassador and consume his neural matter. It would absorb his memories and understand how he had united. Impossible allies then. It would wear his face and undo everything. Okafor was alone when the Neurovore found him. He had sent his team ahead to complete their mission. He had stayed behind to coordinate the battle from a junction point where communications were strongest. He did not see the creature approach until it was nearly on top of him. The Neurovore rose before him like a nightmare made flesh. Dozens of eyes studied him with ancient hunger. Tentacles reached toward his head, toward the brain matter that the parasite craved. It said the human was clever. It said the human had achieved something impressive. It said consuming his mind would be a true pleasure. Okafor did not run. There was nowhere to run. Instead, he reached into his belt and pulled out a knife. It was primitive steel, forged on Earth using methods thousands of years old. His grandfather had made it. His father had carried it. Now it was his. The Neurovore laughed with 1,000 stolen voices. It said it had consumed warriors from 100 species. It knew every combat form in the galaxy. A primitive blade could not harm it. Okafor said the Neurovore had made another mistake. It had consumed warriors. It had absorbed memories of formal combat and military training, but it had never consumed a human. Who was cornered, he attacked. The fight was not elegant. It was not skillful. It was ugly and brutal and primal. Okafor slashed and stabbed without technique. He took wounds that would have killed most beings and kept fighting. Blood poured from cuts across his arms and chest, but he did not stop. The Neurovore had never experienced anything like this. Its consumed memories contained no framework for understanding an enemy who ignored pain, who embraced damage, who fought harder as they grew weaker. For the first time in its ancient existence, the parasite felt something it had only known from victims. Fear, O-K-O-K-F-O-R, drove his knife into the center of the Neurovore's mass. The blade was not enough to kill the creature. But it was not meant to kill. It was meant to hold the Neurovore in place. Dr. Webb emerged from a side tunnel, carrying the device he had built. It was crude, assembled from parts never designed to work together. Varaxian power cells connected to silicoid. Focusing crystals connected to cryoborn cooling elements. Webb activated the device. A beam of absolute cold struck the Neurovore. The parasite tried to flee, but Okafor's knife anchored it in place. The cold spread through its body, freezing the parasitic tissue solid. The Neurovore's many eyes went dark one by one. Okafor collapsed against the tunnel wall. His wounds were severe. His blood painted the metal floor, but he was smiling. Lieutenant Chen appeared beside him. She had medical supplies salvaged from the station's infirmary. She began treating his wounds with practiced efficiency. Okafor asked about the battle. Above, Chen said the council was winning. The coordination was holding. Species that had been enemies for millennia were fighting together and discovering they were stronger, united than divided. Okafor nodded. He said that was good. He said humanity had given them a gift. The ability to trust. The ability to cooperate. The ability to become something greater than the sum of their parts. Chen said there was one more thing. The Neurovore reinforcement fleet was coming. Hundreds of ships. More parasites than the council could fight. Okafor asked about their plan. Chen smiled. She said, Dr. Webb had not just built one device outside the station. In the cold void of space, the Neurovore fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. Hundreds of ships filled with parasites, hungry for conquest. They had exactly 3 seconds to register the modified satellites. Orbiting the station before those satellites activated, the same cold that had killed their leader spread across their fleet in a wave of absolute zero. Ship after ship froze solid. Parasites died by the millions in the council chamber. The last of the controlled soldiers fell. The Battle of the Summit was over, and the galaxy would never be the same. They invited humans to the Death World Summit, their final. Fatal Mistake Part 5. The Summit Station fell silent for the first time in days. The bodies of fallen soldiers and shattered neurovores littered the Great Hall. Smoke drifted through corridors that had seen violence their builders never imagined. The ancient seat of apex power had become a battlefield, and humanity had changed everything. Ambassador Kenji Okafor sat in the medical bay while doctors from 6 different species worked on his wounds. The injuries he had suffered fighting the lead neurovore should have killed him. The alien physicians could not understand how his heart still beat. The Varaxian High Commander stood nearby, watching the treatment with something new in his eyes. Respect. Genuine respect earned. Through blood and sacrifice, the commander said he had been wrong about humans. He said his entire species had been wrong. They had looked at soft skin and small bodies and seen weakness. They had missed what lay beneath. Okafor smiled despite his pain. He said humans were used to being underestimated. He said it was actually quite useful. The commander made a sound that might have been laughter. He said he understood now. He said deception was a survival tool. He said hiding strength behind apparent weakness was its own form of power. In the days that followed, the full scope of the neurovore infiltration became clear. The parasites had spent 30 years placing agents throughout galactic civilization. They had manipulated wars. They had engineered famines. They had assassinated leaders and replaced them with puppets. The damage would take decades to repair, but it would be repaired, because the Council of Apex Predators no longer existed. The 14 species gathered one final time in the Great Hall. The chamber had been cleaned of debris and bodies, but scars remained on the walls and floor. Marks of the battle that had united ancient enemies. The Silicoid Patriarch spoke first. He acknowledged that his people had violated quarantine laws for decades. He acknowledged that pride and arrogance had blinded them to threats they should have seen. He acknowledged that without human intervention, the hegemony would have fallen. He also acknowledged something more difficult. He said the charges against Lieutenant Chen were withdrawn. He said she had proven her innocence through actions, not words. He said the Silicoid hegemony owed her a debt. Chen stood among the human delegation with quiet dignity. She had helped save a civilization that had been ready to execute her. She had every right to demand apologies or compensation. Instead, she simply nodded. She said the debt was paid. She said moving forward together was more important than settling old scores. The Cryoborn representative spoke next, then the Thornbacks, then each species in turn. They confessed hidden betrayals. They admitted secret conflicts. They laid bare the rot that had poisoned their alliance for centuries. And then they did. Something unprecedented. They asked humanity for help, the Varaxian commander explained. He said the council had failed because apex predators did not know how to trust. They had evolved on worlds where everything was a threat. Cooperation was foreign to their nature, but humans were different. Humans had somehow evolved the ability to work together even with strangers. They built civilizations from countless competing groups. They formed alliances across vast differences. The commander asked if humanity assisted them. Ambassador Okafor looked at his small delegation. For humans had walked into a gathering of the galaxy's most dangerous species. They had been mocked and threatened and nearly killed. Now, those same species were asking for guidance. Okafor said yes. He said humanity would be honored to help build something new. The Council of Apex Predators was dissolved that day. In its place, a new organization was born. They called it the Coalition of Unified Species. Membership would no longer be determined by the deadliness of your homeworld. It would be determined by your commitment to collective survival. Humanity was given a permanent seat on the founding council. 6 months later, the first anniversary of the Battle of the Summit was marked across the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for millennia exchanged diplomats and trade agreements. Joint military forces patrolled the borders of known space, watching for neurovore remnants. Cultural exchanges brought beings from hundreds of worlds together to learn from each other. On Earth, Ambassador Okafor stood before the United Nations. His wounds had healed, but he carried scars that would never fade. Marks of the fight that had changed galactic history. He reported on the progress of the coalition. He described the challenges that remained. He spoke of the work still to be done. Then he said something that silenced the assembly. He said humanity needed to understand what had truly happened at the summit. He said the other species had not been defeated by human strength or human technology. They had been transformed by human philosophy. For 3,000 years, apex predators had believed that power came from being the strongest individual. They had built their civilization on competition and dominance. They had achieved great things, but they had also created great weaknesses. Humans showed them another way. Humans demonstrated that true strength came from connection, from sacrifice, from carrying each other through impossible darkness, from refusing to leave anyone behind. That lesson had saved the galaxy, and now it would reshape it. In the years that followed, the coalition expanded beyond anything its founders imagined. New species joined, not because they were forced, but because they wanted to belong to something greater than themselves. The principles humanity had demonstrated at the summit became the foundation of a new galactic civilization, not domination through strength. Unity through choice. The neurovore remnants watched from the shadows of forgotten space. They had lost their invasion. They had lost their fleet. They had lost their chance to feast on apex predator civilizations destroying each other. But they were patient. They had lived for millions of years. They could wait for the coalition to fracture. They could wait for old hatreds to resurface. They could wait for humanity's influence to fade. They would wait forever if necessary. What they did not understand was that waiting would not help them, because humanity had given the galaxy something that could not be undone. A memory, an example. A moment when ancient enemies had stood together and discovered they were stronger or united. That memory would spread. It would grow. It would become legend, and then become history, and then become truth. The neurovores had planned for everything, except a species that could inspire change simply by demonstrating it. On a small observation deck of a coalition station, Ambassador Okafor stood looking at the stars. He was old now. His hair had gone completely gray. His body carried the weight of years and battles, but his eyes still held the same fire that had faced down apex predators and parasites alike. Lieutenant Chen, now Ambassador Chen herself, joined him at the window. She asked what he was thinking. Okafor smiled. He said he was thinking about mistakes. The apex species had made a mistake when they invited humans to their summit. They had seen a chance for entertainment and discovered a catalyst for change. The neurovores had made a mistake. When they underestimated human pattern recognition, they had planned for predators and encountered detectives, and perhaps Okafor said humanity had made its own mistake. They had come to the summit hoping to observe and learn. Instead, they had started a revolution. Chen said it did not feel like a mistake. Okafor agreed. He said some mistakes led to better outcomes than any plan could achieve. Outside, the stars burned eternal and uncaring. But among them, spreading through the darkness like a wave of light, something new was growing hope. Unity, humanity, single quotes, as gift to the galaxy. And in the deepest reaches of space, where the neurovore remnants plotted their return, a new warning had begun to spread. A message passed from ship to ship, from station to station, from world to world. Do not threaten the coalition. The humans are watching. The humans remember. and they never, ever give up.